Welcome to the meeting. This is a somewhat special SCiO UK Open meeting in that we don't have the usual agenda. I'm not going to trudge through the parish notices. There'll be just a couple of slides at the beginning, and then we're going to get straight into it. And essentially what we're going to talk about today is the whole challenge of, I suppose, communicating the subject of systems thinking and how that works and how we might do that. And there was a little team in SCiO who went away to think about application and communications of systems thinking. And this is effectively the result of those efforts, which I'm trying to think how long we've been doing this, Jan, but it's probably about a year and a half, something like that. We've
It's
been
indeed a
dabbling.
year and a half. Yeah, we started in March last year.
So there you go, 18 months worth of dabbling is what
Yeah.
you're gonna hear from today. Um, so for those of you who might be new to SCiO, or for whom this is perhaps your first sort of open meeting, we're the professional body for systems practitioners. So as part of that community, we essentially support development and dissemination of systems practice. We're owned by our members, we operate internationally, and we're not for profit. So our belief is essentially that the traditional approaches to running organizations and institutions like government are responsible for many of the problems we see, and that systemic approaches offer radically better alternatives. I'm not necessarily sure they're radically new, but they're probably radically new in terms of the level of acceptance and implementation in a large number of our institutions and organizations. So one of the reasons we are here is that in many cases, unless you happen to be lucky enough to be a member of a systems thinking dedicated consultancy practice or something like that, most of us feel in some little way a little bit isolated in some of the organizations where we function. So this is a place to kind of go, no, I'm not actually insane. This is a sensible way of going about it. Here is another bunch of unloved folks who also want to try and do this stuff. So this is a place for us to have a conversation amongst like-minded people and see how we're addressing similar challenges. So obviously the events that we do, whether they're development events that Leslie runs or various chapter leads in the countries, are there to try and help that community come together. There is loads of stuff on the website. If you're already a member, great. Please play your subs when the reminder comes. If you're not a member, go check out systemspractice.org. There is a ton of stuff about events in the UK, events globally, so you can find out about what's going on and how you might get involved. Now, because we're a community of practitioners, we kind of need to be able to share our experiences without worrying that someone will try and steal our IP, or will try and sell them something, or will leak information about a project that we're doing. So whilst we are here to try and learn and have fun, we will put up stuff in general that is sort of rag status. If it's green, it's public domain, help yourself. If it's amber, it's company or content confidential. It might be open, so ask. If it's red, it's fully protected, so ask, and red is the default. So unless we say it's green, please ask. And even if you ask and they say yes, please accredit. If you've got something from someone, please say this is where I got it from and give credits to work that's been done. I think because this is effectively what we're doing today is communicating something that's been done in SCiO and something that we've effectively published and you can go and get. I think this one, Jan, as far as I'm concerned, is green
Of
because
course.
because it's out there in the public domain now, and we will be putting more and more out of it out in the public domain as we go through this sort of launch. So this is the first thing, I suppose, where the team has had to go and launch what we've done. So so at this point, we're going to swap slides and we're going to talk about a thing called opening the box. So this is going to sort of work in, there's going to be a bit of me, a bit of breakout activity, some Jan, another breakout activity, and a little bit of me at the end. And then any discussion that you want to kind of have in that. So there'll be some opportunities to go and have discussions in small groups. And we'll probably just do that in small and randomish size groups. And when we get to that point, I will just randomly set people off into little groups to go and have conversations. But for the first part, it's sort of a bit of an introduction into sort of why we did this. There's only two of us from the Global Collaboratory team on the call, Jan Devish and myself, Tony Kritsky. Miguel Pantaleon is in Tenerife, apparently working. This must be the only person I know who ever goes to Tenerife to work. So top marks to Miguel for going and doing that. And Namrata it's midnight her time, so I wasn't exactly expecting her to come and join us, but she has been an integral part of the team as we've gone through. So the four of us kind of got together and did most of this. Well, I think Ed, you came and joined us for some early parts of it, but wasn't able to continue with the work that we've eventually sort of managed to
True,
produce. So,
true. Yeah,
but thank you for
I
your
got too much on my plate, but I'm really glad you persevered. So thank you very much for that.
No worries. So effectively, there's four of us who are sort of presenting and launching what we've done. And essentially opening the box is this idea of systems thinking for transformative conversations. And what you're going to sort of see is a little bit of something that is, I suppose, a transform. What essentially we've done is created something that is a conversation about transformative conversations. So it's a sort of slightly meta sort of thing that we've created, but we'll talk to you a little bit about that in a second. So just start with just a little stimulation, a little provocation. Why do we collectively create the outcomes that we want? And whether that is, whether we're talking about things like clean energy or information access or some of the things the outcomes that we don't want, like, for example, threatened democracy or technological unemployment or confirmation bias or disease or crime. So all sorts of things result from the systems that we have in our societies and our organizations and our governance. And one of the points that we've been sort of, I suppose, dabbling and thinking about as this team is this point about systems thinking being, in essence, going deeper into those causal mechanisms behind issues and trying to address them in a way that can genuinely be transformative. So rather than tinkering on the surface and dealing with symptoms and kind of never really getting to the things that drive those behaviors and actions, we are here trying to figure out and say, well, how can systems thinking get underneath that skin and really deal with those issues? By the way, for anyone who might be making notes, these slides will be on the SCiO website when we come to the end. So don't worry too much about having to do that, as will this video, by the way. So you'll be able to come and see that at your leisure. So the idea here is that we're trying to sort of figure out how we can use systems thinking to get into causal mechanisms behind the issues and be genuinely transformative rather than just dabbling on the surface, fixing symptoms. So I'm going to just talk for a moment about what the SCiO Global Collaboratory was. Essentially, by the time we got to the end, we had leads from 4 chapters across the world: Belgium, India, Spain, and the UK. We set up with the intention of creating some assets that we could use for SCiO and for the participants through sort of collaboration. So it was genuinely collaboratory. We had some initial meetings about what makes sense for us to work and understanding each other's strengths and working styles. So a little bit of sort of figuring out who we all were and what we all brought to the party. The little diagram, which you sort of see slightly grayed out in the background, was one of our attempts at trying to make sense of, I suppose, circular economies. We started with thinking about circular economies and donut economies and stuff like that, and going, how do those work? How do you kind of like, how can you apply systems thinking to some of those ideas before we hit upon the idea that, well, actually, the key was communicating it so that people could understand and use it. And we did do a presentation at the International Communal Studies Association around this idea of sort of food systems, climate change, circular economy. And that was back in January of this year. And then it led us to this idea that we should create some sort of thing that would cater to all audiences and clarify the ideas of systems thinking and its application in the real world. And we said that that should be in a simple and relatable manner. And I know that there's a slight sort of something that's slightly oxymoronic about that, in that systems thinking dealing with complexity, we're saying we want to communicate simply, but we realize that this is such a big barrier to adoption and understanding of what this is all about, that we couldn't just leave it. This had to be something we went and chased. So that's sort of essentially the background to the collaboratory. So we started to think about a number of questions that we thought should be addressed. So firstly, how can systems thinking help in solving complex organizational issues? How can we prove accessibility of the methods and the practice for people? We're going to put a couple of hats on here. So as a CIO, how can I engage with this alien thinking approach, i.e. something I've never been taught in business school, something I've possibly never been taught at all, something that in fact, in some cases, the education system thumps out of you. That was one of our questions. Then we also, with our CEO hat on, thought, how can this really help me to do what I want in my organization? And then we were also asking the question from a practitioner or user perspective of systems thinking as a set of methods. What does real systems practice look like on the ground? How does that actually work? And the little diagram on the right-hand side is a sort of expression of that, which is that the idea that you have a practitioner and somehow between the middle of the practitioner and the client who might be in an organization. So it might be an actual organization for whom the practitioner is an external client, or it might be an internal practitioner, an insultant, as I sometimes call them. And how does that enable engagement? And then how does the organization sort of say, oh, I need some of these, I need some help from some of these. And then how does the practitioner then work with that client to deal with a specific topic in the kind of space of then trying to deal with the disruption from increasingly complex problems that hit them all the time. So there's a sort of, I suppose you could switch this diagram around, and perhaps I should have done, and thought of it, it's a sort of, Ashby's requisite variety model where the organization's attempting to deal with the disruption of the world. And then there's a piece of how does the practitioner then get engaged and is seen as helping to try and help the organization make sense of that, whether it's an organization, institution, or something larger. So it could be anything from, a small business right the way through to the, a function, the United Nations, where this applies, and any recursive layer of that therein. Okay. So we sort of started to think about that set of interactions. And then a few questions popped out of that, which were, firstly, how do we convey that which exists and is an organized whole held in balance by its parts? So we're thinking about, what's the dynamic of an organization and its structuring? How can we focus on the ongoing interactions between subjects or events where both change as a result of the interaction? So we're trying to get to this idea that, things being connected, the interrelationship between a person and what happens in an organization and a set of persons. Then how can we also detect and describe shifting patterns of interaction over time, with an emphasis on the pattern and not just the individual motions? So it would be easy to kind of go very transactional and go, oh, well, it's all about the individual, what's happening, rather than going, hold on, what is happening? What's the pattern look like here that we're talking about? And then finally, how do we sort of evaluate systems in terms of their inclusiveness, their differentiation, their degree of integration or equilibrium? So these were some of the questions we were sort of tossing around as a team to try and make sense of and go, well, how can we use systems thinking to help organizations make sense of that kind of set of practitioner, organization, problem interaction, and then doing something in the organization that made sense as practitioners, but also doing something in an organization that made sense as, the C level, people in theory making the decisions about the strategic direction of an organization and go, well, who do I pull in and why? So that was some of the stuff we were tussling with. Then we sort of hit upon a, well, why a book? Why an essay? And I think, I can't remember, Jan, was it you who brought Ursula Le Guin to the table? I think it was.
Yes.
And we were kind of inspired by, for those of you who are aficionados of science fiction or science fantasy, this is a brilliant writer. She's probably more known as a science fiction writer or a political sci-fi writer, Ursula Le Guin, and she wrote an essay called The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction. And in that essay, she challenges these ideas of what fiction means and how it's told. And this sort of inspired us. And we realized that it was a different way of thinking about a story and its actors and how we kind of bring a carrier bag, which is not a plastic carrier bag necessarily, but just a bag with stuff in of cultural artifacts and thoughts and beliefs and values to stories and how we receive them and how they're told and how they're put together and how they're expressed and shared. So interestingly, the essay quite implicitly sort of explores fiction as a system, but it does it through a kind of lens of social conditioning and lived trajectory, the way we might think about a story. And in it, Le Guin deliberately questions this idea of what constitutes context and perspective. And a central point of her writing is that in this essay is that our thinking is deeply rooted in our culture, language, and experience. And we thought, could we write something as inspiring and interesting as the Le Guin's book, Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction? I'm not going to answer that question. If you get round to reading the book, or whether it's in the little notebook format or in Kindle, maybe you'd like to tell us, and we'll tell you how you can share that with us afterwards. But that's down to you whether you think we've kind of met the spirit of what Ursula Le Guin was trying to do, and whether we've taken the thinking about systems thinking to the same meta level that she took the idea of the theory of fiction. So effectively, Opening the Box is an essay to provoke thinking. So it's deliberately kind of provocative. And in it, there is some narrative, but there's also kind of a unique dialogue between Pandora and her notional grandmother. So this is the Pandora of Greek myth, the one who opened the box. And that's partly inspired by the idea that systems thinkers are quite often people who open boxes in organizations that other people find deeply uncomfortable about. They don't want us to open that box because it exposes all sorts of stuff that they wish, oh crap, I wish that had been hidden. I wish that had never come out. Oh, that threatens my knowledge, that the sense of my expertise and my ability. And then we thought, well, Pandora does this very beautifully in Hesiod's myth. So we thought, well, Pandora was a perfect character as a sort of young but hyper-intelligent person in Hesiod's story. So we'd use her identity and the idea of the wise grandmother who then steers her. So the essence of what we're trying to do here with this dialogue is to sort of give some sort of profound insights into understanding reality and questioning narrative and navigating the interconnected world. Whether we have got really profound again is totally up to you as receivers about whether you think we've got there. But it sort of the narrative essentially is centered around 4 layers of systemic thinking: parts and wholes, emerging change, coherence, and metamorphosis. And that's kind of the book is kind of structured into those sorts of things. We start with the idea of understanding, and we go through these pieces, and then we come back to the idea that the end is the beginning, the kind of circularity of things in the world as we see it. So that's essentially what we tried to do. So at this point, I want actually to have a little breakout, and it might be groups of 3 or it might be more, but I'm going to do a little screenshot of this screen so that you can use it. And if anyone, before you go off into your, before we assign you into your groups, I'm going to ask you if you've got a screenshotting thing, then go and do a screenshot, because you'll get this slide and we can, you can actually have the questions. So I want us to break us out, and I'm going to do this in a minute, but just talk through what I'm going to do is, what's your experience of communicating how you do what you do? as a systems thinking practitioner or someone who dabbles in systems thinking, whatever you do, I don't really care. I'm just interested in your experience of communicating how you do what you do. So, and that could be conceptually, whether that's in strategy or marketing, whatever. And pick a couple of the questions below and spend, like, 5 to 10 minutes on each. So the first one is, what's the difference between how we communicate to various people, whether that's practitioners, the C-suite, business, public service, or third sector stakeholders. So again, thinking about what you do, how do you adapt your communications to different groups? What works well for sense making? That's another of the questions you can go to. What leads to good decision making? What doesn't work? So you might want to look at the perverse model of it. And then finally, you could also think, what resources are useful to you when you practice? I am not expecting any of the breakouts I assign to go and answer all 5 questions. If you get to 2 of them, I'll be a happy bunny. But just pick 1 or 2 of them, do the discussion really well, and come back in sort of 20 minutes, and we'll come back into a group. I'm not going to ask people to feedback. I'm more interested in what the discussion is that you have as a group in the breakout session that we assign you to. So hopefully, is that okay? While you're maybe taking a screenshot of this little beastie, I'm going to assign people into breakout rooms. I think there are enough of us to do probably 5 or 6. I might do 6. That should be enough. Oh no, 5 might be enough. 5 or 6. And I'm just going to assign you, and off you go. And then those of us who are in the kind of code hosting space will go and dip in and out and see how things are going, and come back. So I'm going to say, come back, please, at 20 past. I will drag you back screaming because I'll close the breakout rooms. But go and have a think about the questions there. Pick 1 or 2 of them, do them, have a good discussion about them, and then we'll come back and then move on into the story of what is effectively in opening the box. Okay?
While you're considering the question, please pause the video at the end of this message and restart when you're ready.
It became clear to us that at a certain moment, it's not important to consider what is out there as being the reality, but that systems thinking is all about observing what isn't thought about at a certain moment, as the cartoon of the Wizard of Fopp, when he walks by a wall and see, and so be it, ask himself what a stupid sentence is that on the wall, and he doesn't read the whole context. So systems thinking is about broadening the thinking of the other and your own thinking. And the book we wrote is not just a book. It's a tool for opening a dialogue around the quality of one's thinking, one's own thinking, and the thinking of the person whom or the group we are talking with. And the basic idea is built on the work of Otto Lasker, is that we can only explore the inner place from which we operate to get closer to the essence of daily work and make better sense of your world. So, following the question, how do we communicate what you do? The answer the book is giving is not a series of answers. It is an invitation to ask a different set of questions, and you will find many, many questions in the book. And at this point, I would like to invite each of you to think about a very tough issue you're struggling with. And in bringing that question to your mind, that issue to your mind, ask yourself what the three important questions are that come to mind in order to better understand the issue. The idea behind it is that it are questions that help you understand the issue. And through all the systems work that I did in the past, I found each time that depending on the person that is in front of me and depending on how the dialogue was going, the only thing that I could do is engage in a kind of a thought procedure. And the book is, you will find 4 chapters in the book, each chapter touching upon a thought procedure, helping you to discover how an issue is part of a bigger picture. For example, if the tough issue, I'm dealing with a tough issue between 2 subsidiaries in a multinational at this moment. And they are, as in many multinationals, struggling for resources through the mid and long-term planning and budgeting exercise that is going on. Well, the first procedure in order to build a systemic way of thinking is helping to see how that issue is part of a broader context. The second procedure is helping to see how that struggle has been evolving in the past and what you can reinterpret in order to create possibilities for the future, but also reinterpret, reconstruct the future to open possibilities in the present. So the thought procedures are all about multiplying the possibilities in thinking, and that's the core of systems thinking. A third procedure is about focusing on the relationships, on the coherence that is shaped. Through the collaboratory, we used causal dynamics to unravel the complexity of circular economy. And we saw at a certain moment structural relationships and groups of relationships. And that was the third thought procedure we were engaging in. A fourth thought procedure, we focused on the tensions and the disequilibria that create risks, but also offer potential opportunities for transformation. So let me go into the 4 thought procedures, coming to the essence of systems thinking. And no matter what systems thinking model you use, you will always be able to observe that the thinking about what you're thinking about is part of a broader context is the first fundamental dimension of systems thinking. And that has to do with the fact that nothing can be viewed in isolation, and there is always a bigger picture that you can consider. And that means that if you have a concept, for example, your tension of your struggle, you can always put that struggle in a bigger whole, in a bigger picture. You can start asking yourself the question, how there is a kind of structure in that bigger picture. You can ask yourself whether it is layers, whether it's the struggle contributes to restoring something in the larger whole or not. The second thought procedure is built upon the insight that everything is in constant change and in motion, like the trunk that is growing through the ironwork, like the wave in an ocean. Everything in nature is in constant change. And that means that you can always, whatever you are struggling with, approach from the consciousness that it has had an evolution and it will evolve further. That there could be patterns in that evolution, that different parts of attention evolve in different paces, that there might be broader processes that play a role in thinking about the change. So basically, systems thinking is not about describing the world. Systems thinking is about creating the world through the thought patterns that you use. A third thought pattern being coherence, how one issue is shaped by the other. The colibri, for example, is shaped by the interaction of the flower. Everything is networked. If you struggle with issues that are in tension, they probably have a common ground. And focusing on the structural relationship helps you makes sense. You can also listen to how your partner or the team that is in dialogue constructs the coherence while being in discussion. And if you observe that they are mainly focusing on parts of the issue, you can jump to coherence thinking to broaden the dialogue at a certain moment. Coherence thinking is also becoming conscious about interrelationships, how one issue really influences the other issue, and what relationships are really critical or not critical. In business, we are using a lot of frameworks and a lot of models. I will go into the business model canvas in just a minute to illustrate that we have a tendency to put everything on post-its, and by having done the listing of the issues, we have the feeling that we have explained the reality, and nothing is nothing. Sense making doesn't simply work in that way. There is always, if you look at coherence, specific networks of connections that are more important than others. So asking what elements you certainly cannot see in isolation from each other is the start of coherent thinking. And the last category of thinking is about metamorphosis. Whatever you think of, whatever context and bigger picture you have, whatever emerging changes that you see, and whatever structural relationships that you might see, you will always, if you think through, observe that it gets into tensions. And that's the underlying driver of real metamorphosis, addressing how you can make explicit the potential in the tensions, and how you can start evaluating systems in their potential. For example, how you can assess systems potentials vis-a-vis one another based on the coordinating mechanisms that you might not have seen. So systems thinking, one of the basic messages in the book is about starting to observe what you are not thinking about and bring that on the table through questioning. And you will find a lot of questions in the book through the examples of the food system that we are all confronted with. Just to catch up with what I shared just before the break, the basic thought behind building transformative conversations is to become aware what you're thinking about and what you're not thinking about while thinking about something. And let me illustrate the 4 thought procedures through the business model canvas. I hope everybody is familiar with the business model canvas. Initially, it was developed as a systemic canvas to invite users to think through the critical dimensions they saw in business modeling and to explore relationships between those dimensions. But if I observe the use of that business model canvas, it has deteriorated a lot over the last 2 to 3 years. It is used to gather post-its in each of the compartments of the canvas. And the thinking that it generates is relatively poor. As a systems thinker, using the set of thought procedures that are outlined in our book, you have a kind of a toolkit, a series of questions that help you introduce richer thinking in the business model canvas. For example, if you start thinking about customer segments, and I was recently engaged in a conversation whether it would make sense to split up the customer segment of the 8 to 14-year-olds, so children, into 2 customer segments, one of 8 to 10 and one of 11 to 14. And there was a discussion whether the first one should be till 9 years old or till 11 years old and the second otherwise. They forgot in considering that customer segment the bigger picture of the relationships with the parents and the situation at home. So a question that I asked was, what is basically the bigger context in which those 2 envisioned customer segmentations take place? And what should you take into account of that bigger picture in constructing or defining those customer segments? A second question. So with that first question, I introduced part whole thinking, considering a customer segmentation as part of something bigger. Of course, the customer segmentation can also serve as the bigger picture for something underneath it. And that helps you seeing the variability within, for example, the segment of 8 till 9-year-olds. That's not a homogeneous segment. Also, the other segment is not homogeneous. So if you consider that segment, what parts make up that segment is a second question you can ask from a part whole thinking, the first thought procedure. The second thought procedure, and of course, in answering those questions, it will determine what kind of relationships, what kind of channels you will use. So your conception of customer relationships and channels depend already on the bigger picture thinking of customer segments. The second thought procedure, dynamic thinking, helps you to ask questions such as, is the way that customer group is engaging with your company has that changed over the last few months or years? So it attracts your attention to the stability or instability of the customer segmentation and helps you see that the pace in which those segmentations evolve, the two or the three you might distinguish, is not at the same pace or is at the same page, preventing you to think very statically about those customer segments. So part whole thinking, one of the possible pitfalls is that you go into static thinking. Dynamic thinking helps you prevent doing that. Because the dynamic thinking also builds upon ideas on how you see that segmentation evolving in the future. And so you might come up with the insight that it simply doesn't make sense to split that broad customer segmentation, because the vision you have of the channels that they might use in the future makes them converge again. In exploring part whole thinking, in exploring dynamic thinking, you will touch upon many dimensions and categories and elements. Some of those will be in a more critical relationship than others. And so coherence thinking helps you see what elements you can really not distinguish one from another in one segmentation or another segmentation. So those critical relationships help you see the common ground and helps you understand the common ground within that segmentation, of course, influencing all the other categories within the business model canvas. You can explore each of the concepts within the business model canvas from those thought procedures, also the value proposition, also the key activities, and on a meta level, explore the kind of critical relationships. Depending on how you conceive, how you explore the richness of the concept, it helps you open the possibilities and come to more integrated decision making. It helps you when you go through the different thought procedures. It helps you even evaluating the critical relationships and the systems that you create through the thought procedures and come to more integrated decision making. So basically what I'm saying is that each concept you might think of, and you might think back to the struggle you kept in mind just before the break, if you have explored the dimensions in that struggle, each dimension or each concept that might come to your mind is basically four-dimensional from a systemic lens. It is part of a larger whole or serves as the whole of something else. It has a certain evolution, and so you make sense of that evolution. It has a particular set of critical relationships, and it has a specific set of tensions that you bump into. So if you explore the last thought procedure in customer segments, once you have outlined the critical relationships, when you think it through to the other dimensions in the business model canvas, a lot of tensions might come to your mind that you need to explore in terms of the potential that they have. So basically what I'm doing now is explaining how questions can further open the thought, and opening one's thought and the thought of the other is the essence, basically. That's what's happening in using questions for transformative conversations. That's basically the most essential part that we want to convey with the essay. So the challenge of systemic thinking is basically the rehearsing of the future and the past and prepare for a range of possibilities. Seeing the layeredness, seeing the functionality, which are all forms of contextual or bigger picture thinking. It's about being conscious of the emerging changes, how everything changes. It's becoming conscious whether or not you think in terms of relationships, coherence, being aware that everything in reality is networked, and becoming conscious that, you, like in the picture of the animals, that everything becomes, everything is embedded in tensions with the potentials that come with those tensions. So we can go now again in groups of 3 and try to share the struggles that you have with each other and ask questions to each other from those thought procedures to discover whether or not it makes sense. So we began the presentation today with pointing to the question that we have, how do we convey the systemic work that we do? The answer that you will find in the book is an invitation to start exploring your own thinking and how you start to observe the thinking of the other. And I would very much like in the breakout that you choose a key concept from your struggle and question it together from the 4 lenses that I introduce, and observe in that questioning how it affects your train of thought.
While you're completing the exercise, please pause the video at the end of this message and restart when you're ready.
So I hope that was useful, that picking one of the concepts that Jan had expressed and actually applying it to your struggle. So I hope that was a useful thing to do, and we can do more of that and online if you want to do that. One thing I want to take, well, obviously there is a book. It is there. And that's my proof copy. That's why it's got "not for resale" splashed all over it. It is actually pocket-sized, and we designed it to be pocket-sized so that people could actually slip it into a pocket and take it with them and read it on a train or a plane without damaging their luggage allowance or thinking, "Oh my God, that's a huge thing I'm having to carry. I don't want to take that with me." So it's deliberately that. And it is pretty much, it expresses the thought processes that Jan talked about, but it does have this nice dialogue. It does not read like a textbook, and it does not read like a business book. And if anyone else is familiar with Ursula Le Guin's writing, and doesn't know the carrier bag theory of fiction, do go off and have a look at that, because that is absolutely fabulous. The book it's about £5 for a print version. It's £2 if you have a Kindle reader, whether that's a Kindle reader on your phone or a Kindle reader on your tablet, or however you do that. So we can do that. And you can either get it from Amazon in the UK if you're UK based, or from Amazon.com if you haven't got the country based. But all of the local Amazon country sites, whether that's France, Netherlands, United States through Amazon.com, all have the book now, and you can order it in most places. If anyone has difficulties, please just come onto the contact thing on the SCiO page and tell us, I'm trying to get the book and I can't get it for one reason or another, and we'll try and help you out. There's a
Tony,
couple of...
can I add something? The book is about 60 pages,
Yeah.
and I've asked several CEOs that have read the book, and they read it in about an hour and a half. So it's really a quick read. One of them said, I must read this a second time.
Well, that's a rarity for that sort of relationship, yeah.
Yes.
So interesting. A couple of things that we are going to do, or are willing to do. One, we're going to create a sort of new action learning or active learning circle for anyone who'd like to talk about the book and its meaning. So that's a sort of book club thing that will we'll gauge interest via LinkedIn. There is a LinkedIn group as set up as Opening the Box as a LinkedIn company. There's a link that you can get to from the SCiO page when I was publicizing this event, and I'll put it back up there again on the SCiO thing, that there is a LinkedIn section, or you can just find Open the Box and search for it as a company identity, and you will find information about it. The other thing is, obviously, we've got other launch events that we're going to do in various geographies. So we've already got Finland and Germany set up. We're going to have similar events, at least in Belgium and Spain, and for anyone else, and we're looking at India as well. If anyone else would like to run a launch event and have a little bit more depth, you can do whatever you like with the launch event. We have to just do this for this one. Then please come to us and say, yes, I'd like to do that. But also, if people do want to have a workshop where you sort of do get a bit more in depth into some of the concepts and how we've kind of like built that, please go into the LinkedIn session and say, I'd like to do that, and we'll start figuring out how to set that up. Leslie, it might be a nice thing we might do for a development meeting, but there's no reason why it should be a UK one. It could be a session anywhere. And it could be a session in any language as well. You don't have to. The book is in English, but that doesn't mean your discussion about it needs to be in English. So any thoughts, questions, and feedback?
Hi, Tony. It's Des.
Yes, Des.
Just from the relatively short breakout room session just now, and just using those four kind of concepts as prompts, yeah, you kind of got into quite a rich discussion around a particular challenge. So yeah, I found it really helpful.
Good.
I just wanted to share that.
Please.
So, yeah, that was really helpful.
Good, thank you, Des. Good feedback. Anybody else? Anyone have any other feedback or any questions you want to ask us?
So I'm Olaf. I'm not educated in system thinking, not at all. I come from a very different background. And maybe, like, very briefly, just a few seconds, to comment on the four sub parts or dimensions of system thinking, as Jan explained. I would like to maybe simply say what are kind of alternative ways of going into the same 4 principles. But just like very briefly, so the first one was part-whole thinking. I work with groups, and I never work with part-whole thinking, but only with whole contribution thinking. So what is the whole, and how do you contribute? So I'm always playing on the individual, the person in front of me. So I'm not in part-whole thinking, but in whole, your contribution to the whole thinking. But it's just not good or better or wrong. It's just slightly off. So it is kind of same, but just slightly off approach, which makes people think differently than parts whole, but always like self-implicative. The emergent thinking, where Jan talked about evolution and motion and change, and everything is in motion and so on. I'm always working with people on when is the disruptive going to happen. So not the slow evolution, but where can we break the evolution? So when is that going to happen? When are we going to jump? So not when are we going to, how are we going to evolve, but when is it going to jump, and what is needed for that, or what parallel realities are needed or need to be nourished to at some point manifest themselves in disruptive ways. The third one was coherent thinking, where we always talk about connections, but what I'm feeling is I'm always amazed in system thinking how we talk about relationships, and I'm a cognitive relationship scientist. And in that science, we only talk about relations in terms of having. What are people having with something or with each other? So relational positions. We never talk about how they are behaviorally connected or dependent. It is, I'm having a lot with my wife. So it is the having. It is the shared. It is a commonality, but it is a third object. A strong relationship consists of 3: you, me, and what we have together. And that is and that is. So when we in relationship scientists depict the relationship, it is never a diet. It's always a triad, and the intangible is what we have. And the fourth one with the metamorphosis is really interesting, where Jan talked about the potential and intention. In our science, we don't talk about potential that much, but about potency. The potency, are you in your power? And when you're in your power, we know that potential will realize. So we're not really focused on the potential, but on the potency. That is like whether people are in their full strength. But I wanted to give that as feedback to say, like, I have no systemic thinking background, but we come very close. We are converging, and I'm trying at this moment with Jan to investigate how both types of thinking can mutually reinforce each other. Sorry for that taking the time, but it's too interesting. So I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you, Olaf, for making those reflections. And you know, what you basically illustrate is that you're also a dialectical thinker, but very much focused on the content with the questions that you put to the foreground. Each of the 4 questions, your question contributing to the whole, is one part of part-whole thinking. Your question on disruption is one of the thought structures of making sense of evolution. Your notion of having something with the having part is about essential structural relationships. And the potency is the content related to the metamorphosis. So you're putting the focus on the content while I'm inviting everyone to look at the thought structure. For me, there is a difference between 3 kinds of knowing. There is the knowing what. Your questions, Olaf, derive a bit from the knowing what. We are convinced that something exists out there. There is the knowing how. But what I'm trying to stress is the third piece of knowing, the knowing from. From which perspective are you making sense? And that can only be approached by becoming aware of the structure you're using to make sense of reality. Robin was first with. putting his hand up.
Yeah, my comments, my observations on this. I think it's a really nice path to take a journey on. You got the 4 waypoints. I would perhaps look at it myself as taking the third one second and the second one third. I'd swap the second and third around, because I think to achieve that journey, to go from now, the as is, to the future ought to be, I would say you need emotional destabilization at an individual and an organizational level. Because if you don't achieve at both individual and organization, the journey won't succeed. And I think the end part is to achieve sustainable change in habits and ways of thinking. But I think it's a nice path. It's a nice map to achieve the change from linear thinking to systemic thinking. And yeah, it's going to be an interesting read. I have ordered. It is en route.
Okay, thank you. Simon?
Hi, thank you very much. I wanted to just make a couple of comments. I mean, this is a book about conversations, and in this session we had some great conversations. So it's already working, right? In the breakout groups, we talked about a lot of things and covered some things, and I met some nice people, which is always great. But it got me thinking, right? I mean, this book should be a conversation starter as well, right? With CEOs about what system thinking can do for them and how it will work, and how maybe, thinking differently will enable them to do new things, which, let's face it, has always been a struggle for us, right? People jump on the latest fad, and a lot of them see systems thinking as potentially a fad. They don't realize the heritage and history that's behind it, and don't understand what it is, and haven't got the time to understand it. So how can we get this book to be that conversation starter? One idea we had on, and forgive me, I'm not very good at names, right? But we had at one of these sessions not that long ago, the guy that writes for The Guardian, talking about systems thinking in ecosystem contexts and stuff, right?
George Monbiot, wasn't it?
That's the guy. Thank you very much indeed. Why don't we send him a copy of this and get him to do a review in The Guardian? And people
would be wonderful.
People in SCiO that are like him, that can get the word out and start passing it to CEOs, and enable that conversation to happen for us, because that I think will be will help with the tipping point if there is one.
Mm-hmm. I would certainly appreciate that very much if you could do that.
But just to add to the importance of conversation, so from as a relationship scientist, we know that there is no single behavior that can improve the quality of relationships, and thus the commitment that stems from the quality of relationships. You can be too intimate or too close or too much communication, and so in every relationship there's always it's inverted U-shape. You can do more in something, but you need to be careful that you're not too friendly or too intimate or too close or too organized or too. And so the only way to find that the maximum in that inverted U-shape is conversation. You never know how many flowers you need to give to your partner in order to feel loved. How many flowers do you want? And that is subject to calibrating, constant calibration.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to know what the quality of a relationship is, because we know when the quality of a relationship is high, then all the loyalty and commitment and to change stems from that. And so, but it's important, we when you look into behavioral economics and these kind of things, then we're always trying to nudge people or whatever in their unconscious or subconscious to make them behave. But there's no single behavior that can guarantee the growth in a relationship.
Using the third thought procedure makes you ask the question, what are the essential relationships that make the quality of the relationship?
Okay. Interesting. Guys, I'm conscious that quite a few people are having to drop off because it's sort of come to 8:30 in the UK, 9:30 in Europe. So I'm going to suggest that I'm going to sort of stop the meeting as such now, and I'll stop the recording. So thank you for everyone who came on this session, and your questions and your thoughts and your participation in the breakouts. Thanks in particular to Jan and to the rest of the Global Collaboratory team for helping us put this thing together. And like I said, go off and have a read and see what you think and give us some feedback. And it would be lovely to hear that. So I'll bring this to a close and I'll stop the recording. If anyone really desperately wants to hang on to the bridge and have any sort of follow-up, of course, I'll leave it open for half an hour or so. But I'll stop things there and say thank you to everyone.
Thank you so much. Really helpful.